Hey everybody, Drewby's Apiary here. Today is November the 9th. I know it's been a long time since I've done a video. We're out here at Apiary Yard 1. And today what we're going to be doing is, for one, I'm going to be catching you guys up on what's been going on with all of my hives across the board over this past month. But also kind of talk about today what we're going to be doing with our hives as far as winter preparation. You know, we're full smack dab in the middle of fall, and there's not a whole lot of time left here in Georgia to get our hives ready for the winter. You know, we do have mild winters here in Georgia. We do have the luxury that we get a little bit more time to do things like feeding, etc., compared to some other places. And usually here we have until Thanksgiving time to make our final preparations. One of those preparations that I've done, aside from feeding, has been doing another round of mite treatments, which did not document in a video. Again, I've been too busy the past month or so with some life event stuff that I've needed to focus on, that haven't had time to do many videos. But with that mite treatment, I have completed 2 separate 10-day treatments with Formic Pro on all of my hives. There were a few hives in here that, while I didn't do a sugar shake, I knew that they had a mite load, even though I gave them Apiguard in July. One of those was the blue hive. I could see on those Apiary bottom boards, I saw like a mite drop just naturally, just like mites dying, falling on that board. And you can always presume, if there's a lot of dead mites on your bottom board, that you have a lot of living mites inside your hive. So I wanted to make sure I treated across the board going into winter, and that's normal. I know some beekeepers are lucky enough that they can treat their bees once or twice a year. I'm one of those type of people that is usually 3, if not 4 times a year, depending on what goes on. So without further ado, I am going to go into some of these hives. As you can kind of see, the entrances are open, because that is one of the things you're supposed to do when giving a Formic treatment, is not reduce the entrance, but open them, raise them. So I'll be going in there and removing the Formic pads, which, if you read if you read Nod's packaging instructions, they mentioned that you could just leave the pads in there, but I'm going to take them out, and they will naturally degrade over time outside of the hive, and that's just, it'll allow it to be easier for me to work in these hives. And then I'm going to show you my internal feeding system and kind of talk about that, and maybe if we have time, we'll talk about some of the other yards as well. All right, we're gonna start over here. Reason being is I need to change the internal feeder that's on this hive. Had to lower the entrance, probably move it up a bit too. That will come up. The internal feeder that we have in this hive was a much smaller round top feeder. Kind of show you it up close. They've pretty much finished it up. But this one is a much smaller. This one's meant more for nuke size inner covers. I just had it because it was the size that I have, but we're going to swap it out for the normal round size right here. and that should last them a lot longer going into the winter. We're gonna use this one later for a different hive that's gonna need it, that's a much smaller size. So let me open this up real quick and set the camera back down and talk a little bit about that. So you might have been able to tell from just looking at there, I'm feeding dry sugar right now. I attempted to do a heavier sugar syrup feed, and it worked okay for a time. However, we had a really bad freeze in early mid-October, a little bit after the recording of the last video, and that really set my bees back. In fact, I'll go into it later, where I ended up losing some hives because of various reasons, but one of them being that freeze. And those were weaker colonies, but again, we'll get into that later. But one of the problems with that freeze is all of my bees stopped taking sugar syrup. And even though it warmed up a bit over the past 2 weeks, it's just been this back and forth where some of my hives would or wouldn't take it, but they have been taking dry sugar syrup, I'm sorry, just dry sugar, like table sugar, like this. You can see right there, right? Ever since. Let me take this out. This is gonna upset them, unfortunately, but nothing they can do about that. And if you remember, Orange Hive was one of my splits from earlier in the spring. One thing I do different though when I feed dry sugar is I do top the dry sugar off with some liquid syrup. Let me explain the logic of that. Bring my stuff over so it's easier to show y'all. So, yank this off. Set this to the side. Take that off. I'll remove the former throw pads. All right. Make a little pile. All right, so this is now fixed as far as me getting it set up the way I wanted to get it set up. Kill some hive beetles. I'm still getting a few. No more right there. I have these notched feeders. See the little, or not feeders, but notched inner covers. See that? I like those during the winter months to be on the top side, because that's honestly just where all my condensation is going to be. And I don't want to let in a draft without sealing it off on the front door. So yeah, good cluster. I'll zoom this, show you all this. A lot of bees in here. Check the weight real fast. It's actually got good weight. Doesn't feel light at all. So yeah, just keep feeding them. Not much else you can do, but good cluster. Set that back down. Put our new feeder on. I kind of want to show you what I mean when I say what I'm doing. There we go. What I try to do is, let's see, dry sugar first, right? Winter months, a lot easier for the bees to take down dry sugar than the liquid. They won't feed on it when temperatures are below like the mid 50s essentially. But it's very hard for bees to get the dry sugar down compared to liquid, which should make sense. So what I do, after adding some on, like I'm doing right now, is I take a little bit of 2-to-1 sugar syrup. And what I'm doing, pouring some on top. Not much. I want almost like a, I just want like a little bit so it starts to get that dry sugar wet. And the reason why we want the dry sugar wet is we're trying to simulate what's kind of like a candy board idea. So as condensation, as heat's rising through the hive, through this little hole, the bees are going to climb up the hive, climb up through the little hole, and it's going to hit the inside of this cover, and it's going to condensate moisture on that dry sugar and get it wet, and it's going to start to harden for it. And that's going to make it a lot easier for these bees to take down this dry sugar. So that's the idea we're going to do hive to hive today. I just wanted to swap this one out. I'm just going to be going through, changing these out. I'll put it on a time lapse, and I'll give you an update if I notice anything along the way. All right, that's it for this yard. As you saw from the time lapse, all I was doing was basically going through, checking weight, feeding, removing the Formic Pro strips, checking the mite counts on the bottom boards, which looks like Formic Pro did the trick, getting these hives ready for winter, and they're all looking very good. Didn't pull out any frames. I'm not worried about that. I know they got a good, strong cluster. To be honest, there wouldn't be much I could do aside from combine anyway. So the reality is there might be one more internal check, if you want to call it that, near the end of the month, and that would just be to decide if any last minute changes needed to be made. But again, this time of the year, I know I got lucky my first year getting a queen somehow late season. I think these hives are queen right, and they seem to be full of bees in the bottom. They're all just a single deep, and that top is just the feeder. So this is how we're gonna try to overwinter them and leave it at that. So I'm gonna try to move to the next yard and give you guys an update over there. Here's one thing I wanted to share with the group, found interesting. This is the first hive on the right, first one I started at. Most of these hives, -2, got a Apiguard treatment again in the fall. I did a follow-up one just to get them cleaned up once more before going into the winter. Again, I usually always do the big three for me are, I try to do Formic in the spring and fall, and Apiguard in the summer is kind of what it's gonna be moving forward, what I'll probably stick with. But down here, this hive was treated with Formic, and I always see a bigger kill count with the Formic, and it's really hard to tell, but all this debris right here, believe it or not, I shouldn't say all, but I could almost tell you that 60 to 70% of this brown material are all just dead mites, all of them. So It's interesting that, you know, this is a solid bottom board. Had this been a screen bottom board, you know, they would have fallen on the bottom or fallen out depending on if it was open or not. But all of this area right here, it's like it was too cold for them to either do anything about it, but these are all just dead mites. Whole pile of them. So I'm gonna scrape them out, get them out of there for them. You know, usually these bees would be a little cleaner, I would think. Some pollen on her legs. All right, but I guess not. So get some of the dead out. I found that very interesting. I just want to show that. You know, bees usually, they have the ability to carry things out, but maybe to them they didn't see it as being a threat since they knew it was dead. And they had other more important things on the inside of the hive to manage. There, a lot better. So I'll continue the time lapse. Just wanted to share that, and we'll move on for some other hives. So one thing I want to share with you all today, unfortunately, this far right hive, so you see all the orientation of all the hives out here, this one right here is a dead hive. And not sure if I'm going to have time today or a different day this week to show you the similarities of this one with another one, because I had some other dead outs in the fall, which I found. All right, video cut off, but as I was saying, this hive right here is a dead out. Here's actually the queen, sadly. She had never been marked, which is very interesting because I usually keep good notes, and I don't remember writing a note down for one that I missed. But what was crazy about this was there was almost no bees in it. I had an incident when I moved this hive from over there to over here a couple weeks back. This was like an extremely aggressive hive. Got lit up really good trying to move them. And they were actually a pretty big population, which was surprising. But last week I saw activity, so all this took place probably within the past 7 days, and it's just interesting, kind of shows glass cutting out, that there were no dead bees at the bottom of this, minus the queen and like 2 or 3 attendees. There's like no bees dead out front, so I don't know. And what makes matters worse is there's an 8 frame over there that was dead out too, but it was in a rough spot. So I'm gonna wait till I get a battery charged. Sorry about that, folks. Like I said, that battery's being unresponsive. So now we're on the next day. We are actually out here at Apiary Yard number 2 on the following day, November 10th. And so in summary from that last video, over at Apiary Yard number 4, I mentioned, or I was trying to show you before the camera cut out, that I had 2 dead outs. I had a 10 framer that was in very good shape a week ago. The only thing that wasn't in good shape was that I had tried to move them because the property owner wanted them moved, and it resulted in the hive pretty much going berserk, which naturally they would, but more aggressive than normal. Got lit up, moved them 7 days ago, they were there. Checking yesterday, they were not there. And in fact, I'm starting to think in retrospect that that hive absconded, because as I showed briefly in that clip, there was just a small queen at the bottom, unmarked, and maybe 3 or 4 attendee bees, no other dead bees inside the hive. It's possible that they were either queenless for a time or in the process of making a new queen when they absconded, or maybe there was always a queen in there and she left with the hive and that was one that hatched out. But very interesting indeed, this late in the year. You know, sometimes you'll get a hive abscond and they were clearly pretty upset about being moved. That was out of my control. But, you know, that's just the way it goes in beekeeping sometimes. You know, my best advice is if you don't have a reason to move a hive late in the year, don't. It can mean certain death, especially if something goes wrong in the process, and that is a great example of just that. It meant certain death for that hive. So could have been other issues, but honestly they had plenty of food and brood, you know, resources in there, so I had to equal them out. And then that other hive, I haven't really shown you all it was a free one I got earlier in the year. When I say early in the year, maybe like a month and a half ago, but when I inherited it, it was an 8-frame equipment hive and they were looking really rough. It looked like someone had given them an Apiguard treatment at some unknown point in time, because there was an Apiguard canister open, still left in there, that was used up. Don't know if it was applied 6 months ago. Don't know if it was applied a year ago. No information on it. But when I received this hive with its bees in it, let's see, it was probably, like I said, mid-September, mid-late September, they were rough and they were looking like they weren't going to make it, and they did not. It looks like they froze to death because there was a whole bunch of dead bees on the bottom of that box that showed clear signs of them not having enough bees, and they froze to death. They had plenty of food, they had plenty of capped honey in there. Couldn't find the dead queen, but I'm sure she was in there in the pile of dead bees. So not good there. And then obviously here we are at apiary yard number 2, and as you can see, this is the other bad news I hadn't shared. So you notice there's a lot less hives out here, a lot less. And in fact, that one I'm going to check and make sure it's not a dead out as well. But there were 3 hives here in the middle, if you all remember. All 3 of them unfortunately passed. I was out here a week and a half ago, and all 3 dead outs. Not many bees in the bottom. I would say maybe 40 to 50 dead bees at the bottom of all 3 hives with a queen, dead queen, and it looks like they just ran out of bees. I don't know if the queens just weren't strong layers. I felt like they had been earlier, but you know, they had issues of putting on weight this entire summer. And so I think they just struggled with getting enough resources for the queen to want to lay a healthy, large enough population going into the winter. I don't think it was, I'm not saying mites aren't a problem, they weren't a problem, but all these hives in this yard have been treated for mites at least once. They were in the process of getting the second treatment when they all had passed as well. You know, there might be something to that. Not really sure. There's some things I could have done better in retrospect, but you know, some of y'all live in different parts of the United States. I've mentioned in a previous video here, one of the biggest things that killed us, we had a very long dearth this summer. I fed the entire time during the dearth, but I should have continued to feed going into what I thought was going to be the beginning of the fall flow. And the reality is we didn't really have a fall flow this year. We stopped having rain first week of September, and between the first week of September through early mid-October, there was maybe 1, if not 2 days of rain, and I wouldn't even call it rain. It was like a very light, you know, dusting of rain out here, and it was just not enough for our fall plants to be producing nectar. There was definitely pollen out there for them to bring in, but almost no nectar. And I just think a lot of these hives, despite me trying to feed them, I think they starved. And what also didn't help was in the middle of October here in this part of Georgia, we had a really bad freeze one night where it got down to the mid-20s. And I don't think the hives that were robust enough could make it. I don't think they had enough time to deal with that kind of temperatures this early. And since then, it's been relatively nice weather. Like right now, it's really windy out here. It's in the 60s. It's been in the 60s the past, let's say, week and a half. No super cold temps. Super cold temps are starting to come in this weekend on Sunday after we get this rainstorm, but I don't know. Very depressing. It's never fun to lose bees. I've never lost this many bees before, but I've also never had this many hives before. And there are a lot of lessons to be learned. And you as a beekeeper need to be very adaptable to what some of those changes could be. So I'm coming out here, checking on these two real fast, add a little bit of feed to them, and then that hive right there, if they're still alive, we're going to be going in there and we're going to be moving them into a smaller hive, a 5-frame nook. I'd given them some brood, let's say a week and a half ago, and they still don't have the population to do a 10-frame box, so they're going to get shrunk down if they're still alive. So without further ado, I'm going to work on that and let you all know what comes of it. Well, as feared, hive number 4 over here at apiary yard number 4 has passed. I'll show you the damage. You can see you got about maybe 70 to 80 dead bees. When I was out here 7 to 10 days ago, I think it was probably 7. Actually, no, it was 10 days ago. There were very few bees. So few, in fact, that I gave them a good frame of brood, which I realize now was a waste, but it was my only shot, hoping that they could hatch and brood out some numbers, because again, as I mentioned, we didn't really have a whole lot of cold nights this past week. In fact, I don't think any night went below 50 over the past 10 days. So it's pretty incredible that even still they froze out or something. I'm not seeing any damage to these bees at all. It's possible they could have just been getting robbed out too, but you know, hard to say. But all right, here's our dead queen. Always a sad, morbid thing to see, especially after a lot of hard work going into getting all these hives good to go. And to be honest, like I said, they did struggle. This entire summer of trying to boost these hives up felt like a constant battle. They just seemed to never be able to get strong. There was a point where I thought they were doing pretty good in July, and I just felt like since August it's just been like an uphill battle that I was just losing for all 4 of them. But it's crazy, it was for all 4 of them. And this is that brood frame I was talking about. You can see all the wax, I'm sorry, not wax moth, but the high beetle larva that's all over the place. I've torched most of it. So this whole frame's gonna get scrapped, to be honest. I think I'm just gonna melt it down. Total waste. Total waste. Pretty disappointing. These two are still as strong as they were, and they're primary culprits for all the robbing. But when I was out here last time, I intentionally opened up their hive entrances to try to make them feel a little bit more vulnerable, hoping that they would be on the defensive, and maybe they were, maybe they weren't. But either way, I find it hard to believe that all 4 of them got hit with the same stuff. But I mean, like I said, they all didn't have big enough populations going into the winter, and the lack of food, even with feeding, and that freeze, I think just demolished them. So probably gonna have to find these bees a new home, honestly, somewhere else, somewhere closer. So I'm gonna wrap things up here. Like I said, I'll try to record some at the last yard if I've got the energy to do so, but that's pretty much gonna be it for the disappointment that is going on out here today. So without further ado, I'll move on to that one. All right, we're out here at the final apiary yard of the day, apiary number 3. And it is lightly raining. I'm underneath a good sized tree that is gonna provide me a little bit of cover while I'm getting these bees put away. Otherwise I would not be doing this at all. But I do need to work quickly because I don't want the bees getting wet. Wet and cold equals danger. Also removing my Formic Pro strips. These bees just finished their 14 days, or sorry, their 10-day cycle of formic. So we're going to get them set up, and then I'll leave it on time lapse, and then I'll get final notes. All right, got a little wet there, but like I said, none of the bees should have gotten wet. I made sure that anytime I was opening up the inner cover, there wasn't any active rain coming down. So I was able to remove the Formic Pro strips, add some feed. This hive right here has been killing it on taking down the feed, which is good. That one's barely taking it down. That one kind of similar, but all three got good weight to them. All of them got a lot of bees in the bottom boxes, so they're not in a weakened state, which is good to see. So, you know, they should be fine for the long haul. Maybe I'll come back out here in, you know, 2 weeks or so, a week or two, we'll see, and see if they need to top off. But yeah, I think right now they're looking pretty good. So like I said, not overall great news. Hope everyone else's bees are doing great this time of the year. It's just crazy, all these fall losses, and I've been talking to some other people that have had similar bad luck going into the fall, or into the fall slash getting ready for the winter. And I don't know what's going on, to be honest. Like I said, this wacky weather has made it very difficult to get prepared, and it doesn't help when bees aren't producing the numbers of bees to help combat certain adversities that they're going to face going into this time of the year, which isn't just cold. I mean, that's a huge part for sure, but just being able to have the numbers to fight off being robbed, you know, hornets. I'm seeing hornets all over the place. You know, what remaining hive beetles, you know, hopefully you guys treated, you know, for mites as well. Like I said, since the spring, this is my third treatment. I did Formic in the spring, Apigard in the summer, and then Formic again right now. And I'm happy I did that because, you know, I've been hearing a lot of folks that did their summer treatments and are still getting high mite counts. And I've been seeing that on my screen bottoms for the ones that do have screen bottoms. So, you know, just something to be on the lookout for. Hopefully your hives are doing good. Y'all stay safe, take care, and I'll try to update you later this month for pretty much the final video before going into winter. Y'all take care, have a good day.